Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to build a solid, reliable blueprint for maintaining a thriving reef tank, and we're going to do it without losing our minds over the chemistry. You know, if you've got a cabinet under your tank that looks like some kind of graveyard for half-used chemical bottles, mysterious potions, and endless color-matching test kits, hey, you are definitely not alone. It's so easy for this hobby to turn into a really stressful chemistry experiment. So today, we're breaking down a fantastic source guide called Reef Tank Parameters: What to Measure and Why. We'll distill all that dense data into a clear, reliable methodology. We're skipping past just the basic dictionary definitions and diving into the exact foundational pillars you actually need to create a healthy, thriving ecosystem, one that lets you kick back and actually enjoy the view instead of constantly stressing over numbers.
To make this whole thing manageable, we're going to journey logically from the overarching physical environment all the way down to the invisible biological layers and then wrap up with a practical routine. So our roadmap looks like this. First, the myth of perfection. Then, the core physical environment, the chemical building blocks, balancing your nutrients, and finally, building a consistent routine. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The myth of perfection. Why stability actually matters way more than hitting exact numbers. We're kicking things off by debunking a massive misconception that plagues even veteran hobbyists. It's this obsession with finding a single, mathematically perfect parameter. The source text makes it absolutely clear. A reef tank succeeds far less on hitting one magic number, like frantically dosing your tank to chase a flawless 8.3 pH, and way more on keeping your overall water chemistry steady over time. Corals and invertebrates, they respond remarkably fast and usually quite poorly to sudden swings. Biologically speaking, when a parameter shifts rapidly, the coral is forced to burn through vital metabolic energy just to adapt to that new baseline. And that's energy completely stolen away from growth, coloration, and immune defense. So whether it's a sudden temperature shift, a salinity spike, or a pH drop, those rapid changes literally stall your tank's progress. Maintaining steady parameters over the long haul is the true foundation of a healthy aquarium. It's all about cultivating a consistent environment, not a mathematically flawless one. Moving on to Section 2, the core physical environment. We're talking the macro level of water and heat here. Let's establish the physical baseline of the tank before we zoom into the chemistry. Our very first physical parameter to master is specific gravity, which is the measurement of your salinity. And this goes way beyond just making sure the water is salty enough. Salinity actually dictates the fundamental osmotic health of literally every living thing in your tank. It's a big deal. The cells of your corals, your invertebrates, and even those beneficial microbes are constantly regulating their internal pressure against the water around them. If the salinity is bouncing up and down throughout the week, you're inducing chronic osmotic stress. Your aquatic life is forced to work overtime just to keep their cell walls stable. That leaves them super susceptible to disease and severely limits their polyp extension. Most reef keepers aim for a specific gravity range right around 1.024 to 1.026, assuming normal tank temperatures. But the real battle here, which our source material really highlights, isn't just mixing your saltwater perfectly on day one. It's managing the relentless reality of daily evaporation. You see, when water evaporates from your tank, the salt gets left behind, period. That means your specific gravity will naturally creep up day by day, hour by hour. And that is exactly why a reliable auto top-off, or ATO system, is arguably the most critical piece of equipment you can possibly own. If your ATO fails, or if you're manually topping off with massive buckets of fresh water every few days, you're creating this aggressive seesaw effect of osmotic shock. Having controlled, automated freshwater replacement is absolutely your first major step toward consistency. Right alongside specific gravity is your thermal baseline. You'll want to pair that steady salinity with a temperature range of 24 to 26 degrees Celsius, which is roughly 75 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, stability matters so much more than hitting an exact decimal point. We know large, sudden temperature swings heavily stress corals, but the source notes that even smaller, chronic shifts can be absolutely devastating. This is especially true in modern ultra-low nutrient systems, or ULNS. In a tank where nutrients are stripped incredibly low, your corals are basically living right on the razor's edge of starvation. They just don't have the internal reserves to bounce back from, say, a sudden 3-degree drop caused by a faulty heater or a drafty room. So, find your temperature within this pocket, build some redundancy into your heating and cooling gear, and keep it locked in tight. Okay, Section 3, the chemical building blocks. This is the invisible skeleton of your reef. Now we're diving into the invisible bones and buffers of your tank's chemistry. Let's start with alkalinity, or KH. Now, we all know the unique misery of squinting at a little glass test vial, trying to figure out exactly which shade of pink we're looking at, right? But dialing in this measurement of available carbonates is just absolutely paramount. Alkalinity basically dictates how easily vital building blocks are available on the water column for corals to build their skeletons. The general target range here is 7 to 11 DKH. But here is the crucial insight. Alkalinity is incredibly dynamic. It is definitely not a set-it-and-forget-it parameter. As your corals thrive and grow, their biological demand skyrockets. A sudden successful growth spurt in your SPS colonies can easily tank your KH levels overnight if your dosing schedule doesn't scale up with them. You absolutely must track its consumption rate so the bottom doesn't fall out of your water chemistry.
Directly tied to that shifting alkalinity is your pH, and we're looking at a target range of 7.8 to 8.5. pH affects the overall carbonate chemistry and dictates how efficiently your corals can actually use that alkalinity you're working so hard to maintain. Now, a massive issue a lot of hobbyists face today isn't actually a lack of chemical buffer, but just poor gas exchange. Think about it. Modern, energy-efficient homes are sealed up tight, which leads to a heavy buildup of indoor CO2. That excess CO2 gets pulled straight into your aquarium water, aggressively driving down your pH and creating these stressful daily roller coasters, especially at night. Often, the best way to fix a chronically low pH isn't dumping more chemicals into your tank. Sometimes, it's just simply opening a nearby window, or running your protein skimmer's air intake line outside to blow off that excess CO2 and restore the natural balance.
Rounding out our chemical building blocks, we've got calcium and magnesium. Calcium, targeting roughly 400 to 450 parts per million, provides the actual raw material for that critical skeletal growth. Meanwhile, magnesium, targeting 1250 to 1350 parts per million, has this fascinating and deeply important symbiotic relationship with that calcium. See, magnesium's primary job is to keep calcium and alkalinity in solution. If your magnesium drops too low, your calcium and alkalinity will quite literally bind together and precipitate right out of the water. To you and me, this looks like a sudden bizarre snowstorm inside the tank. It leaves you with seized-up return pumps, calcified heaters, and chronically unstable water parameters that just refuse to rise, no matter how much you dose. So, testing magnesium frequently enough to catch a subtle dip is exactly what keeps the rest of your skeletal elements suspended and available to your corals.
Section 4. Balancing your nutrients. It's all about finding that sweet spot between starvation and fertilizer.
A crucial pillar of our blueprint is balancing the biological fuel of the tank. Nutrients are absolutely essential, but man, they have to be balanced on a knife's edge. We are targeting roughly 2 to 20 parts per million for nitrate and 0.02 to 0.1 parts per million for phosphate. It can be a bit of an anxiety-inducing tightrope walk. If you strip your water too clean and hit absolute zero, you don't just starve your corals, you open the front door for absolute nightmares like toxic dinoflagellate blooms, which absolutely thrive in zero-nutrient voids. But on the flip side, if you let things slip and those levels skyrocket, the nutrients act as high-octane fertilizer. They'll transform your beautifully aquascaped rockwork into a suffocating field of green hair algae. Mastering this means actively tuning your daily habits. You want to feed your fish and corals generously for vitality for sure, but then aggressively tune your protein skimmer, refugium, and water changes to seamlessly export that excess before it fuels a major problem.
Section 5. Building a consistent routine. Let's talk about putting this blueprint into practice.
Because it's one thing to know all these chemistry targets in theory, but it's an entirely different challenge to actually manage them in the real world. We really need to talk about translating all of this into a tangible daily routine. And that brings us to the most insidious threat in reef keeping: drift. Drift is the silent killer, guys. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens when your foundational parameters slowly, quietly slide out of balance, week by week. You honestly might not even notice it until one day you look at your favorite Acropora coral, realize it looks slightly pale with no polyp extension, and suddenly discover your chemistry has been secretly wandering away from your targets for an entire month.
Preventing that drift requires a highly disciplined, almost ritualistic management plan, like a dedicated Saturday morning routine. It starts with testing using reliable kits or digital probes, and crucially, actually taking the time to calibrate that equipment. I mean, a drifting pH probe will cause you to make completely unnecessary and frankly dangerous adjustments. Always keep a consistent written log of your results. Human memory is terribly unreliable, and a log is literally the only way to genuinely identify if a drop in calcium is just because your corals are consuming more as they grow, or if it's a sudden environmental swing. And most importantly, when you do need to make a correction, you must adjust slowly. In the aquarium hobby, there's a golden rule: nothing good happens fast. Rapid corrections to your water chemistry will shock the system far worse than the gradual drift ever did. Patience is absolutely your greatest tool here.
I want to leave you with this powerful observation right from the source material. With those pillars in place, the aquarium becomes a more predictable environment where corals and beneficial organisms can thrive. The single most effective habit in this entire hobby isn't buying the most expensive, flashy gear. It's just simple consistency. Stable temperature, controlled salinity, properly buffered skeletal elements, and a delicate balance of nutrients. When you respect this blueprint and stop chasing absolute mathematical perfection, the tank stops being a source of anxiety and starts being a living piece of the ocean in your living room. So, looking at your own maintenance routine right now, what invisible chemical shift will you finally take control of in your reef today?